Imagine walking into a courtroom and seeing Denzel Washington not defending a crime, but standing trial for his character. A judge challenges him. The room goes silent. And what unfolds isn't a Hollywood script, it's real life. In a world filled with noise, ego, and image, this one moment cuts through it all. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness will restore your belief in truth, in humility, and in what it really means to live a life of impact. What if one of the most respected men in Hollywood walked into a courtroom and wasn't there to defend himself from a crime, but from a question? Not a question about law or justice, but a question about who he truly is when no one's watching. This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction. This happened, and the moment left an entire courtroom stunned into silence. On a quiet Monday morning last month, inside a grand courtroom lined with polished wood and high ceilings, with an American flag hanging proudly behind the bench, dozens of people took their seats for what was supposed to be a simple community event they didn't know they were about to witness something unforgettable. At the center of it all stood Denzel Washington. Yes, that Denzel, the Oscar-winning actor, the voice of strength and wisdom in film after film, the man whose very presence commands respect. But today, he wasn't there as a celebrity. He wasn't there to promote a film. He had come for something far more important. Denzel had been invited to speak at a youth outreach program, a special initiative organized by the local court to inspire young people who had faced trouble with the law. Judge Maya Thornton, known for her strict demeanor and zero tolerance for nonsense, was leading the program. She had spent over 2 decades on the bench. She had seen the system break people, and she had made it her mission to help young lives avoid becoming statistics. But, as Denzel walked to the podium to begin his talk, something happened no one expected. The judge looked him straight in the eye and interrupted. "Mr. Washington," she said firmly, "I've followed your career, your speeches, your interviews for years. But before you address these young people, I have a challenge for you." The room froze. You could hear the silence stretch between the marble walls. Even Denzel, who had stood in front of thousands, seemed momentarily caught off guard. She continued, "You speak often about humility, service, and character. But in a world obsessed with image, is it real? Is your public humility just a carefully crafted brand? Or do you live by those values when there are no cameras, no applause? No one breathed. Even the young people, some skeptical, some hopeful, leaned in. What followed would not be a speech. It would be a moment of reckoning, a challenge not just for Denzel Washington, but for anyone who has ever asked themselves, do I live the life I talk about when no one is watching? Denzel Washington stood there, still calm on the outside, but inside you could feel the tension. The judge's words echoed in the room. Is it all just an act? Do you really live by those values when no one is watching? It was the kind of question that could rattle anyone, even a man who spent his life in the spotlight. For a long moment, Denzel didn't speak. His hands rested lightly on the edges of the podium. He looked around the room, at the young people in the audience, at the parents and community leaders watching closely, at Judge Thornton, whose eyes were sharp and steady. Then, finally, he took a breath, a slow, deep breath, and began to speak. "That's a fair question, Your Honor." His voice was steady, measured, strong. "And these young people," he added, turning to face the teens seated before him, "deserve an honest answer." Some of the teens looked up. Some still avoided eye contact. Some stared him down, challenging him the same way the judge had. But Denzel didn't flinch. "When I was your age," he said, "I was sitting in a chair in my mother's beauty salon. I was a mess. My grades had slipped. I was hanging with the wrong crowd. I had no direction. The guys I ran with, some ended up in prison. Some aren't here anymore." The room was quiet. The weight of his words filled every inch of space. "One day," he continued, "an older woman at my mother's salon looked at me. She stared for a long time. Then she called me over. She said, Young man, you're going to travel the world and speak to millions of people. I thought she was crazy. I didn't see that in myself. But she saw something I couldn't. Judge Thornton listened closely. She didn't smile, but her posture shifted slightly. She was listening now, not just judging. And here's where it gets real, Denzel said. Because success, fame, money can trick you. They can make you believe you're special, better than others. They can make you forget. The hardest part about succeeding is staying grounded when everyone is telling you you're extraordinary. He paused, stepped slightly away from the podium. Now he wasn't giving a speech. He was sharing a confession. There was a time early in my career, he said, I had just won a big award, walked into a restaurant. I expected to be recognized, to get the best table. Instead, we were seated by the kitchen. I was furious. I couldn't believe I wasn't being treated like a star. The teens smirked. Some nodded in understanding. They knew that feeling of wanting to be seen. On the drive home, I ranted to my wife, he said, and she asked me one simple question. Denzel, did you tip the waiter? The room chuckled. Even Judge Thornton cracked a small smile. No, he admitted, I hadn't. I was so full of myself I didn't even tip. That night I drove back to the restaurant. I found the waiter. I gave him a generous tip, and I apologized. He looked up. It was a humbling moment, but one moment of humility doesn't mean I'm a humble person. And that's where your question hits me, Judge. Because humility isn't a performance. It's a fight. Every day. The room had grown even quieter now, the kind of quiet that doesn't just come from silence, but from people actually listening. Judge Thornton leaned forward slightly. She nodded once, then spoke. That's a nice story, Mr. Washington, but doesn't fully address my challenge. One act of humility does not prove a lifetime of it. Some of the teens looked around. The tension returned. It was clear the judge wasn't backing down. She wanted more. And the young people? They were leaning in now, wanting to see if Denzel could go deeper. Denzel didn't flinch. He nodded respectfully. You're absolutely right, Your Honor. And that's exactly the point. This isn't about a single good deed. This is about the war inside. The daily struggle to stay grounded, when everything around you lifts you up too high. He paused. Let his words sink in. Success can be dangerous, he said. It whispers things to your ego, that you're better, that you're smarter, that you're above criticism. And if you're not careful, you start believing those whispers. He walked slowly away from the podium again. Now he was speaking directly from experience. There was another moment I regret deeply. I was directing a film. The pressure was intense. Long hours, high stakes, a tight schedule. One day, a young crew member made a mistake. A costly one, I snapped. I yelled at him, in front of everyone. I embarrassed that young man. The same way I once felt small in that restaurant. Now I had made someone else feel that way. He looked down. The teens were wide-eyed. Some nodded slowly, like they'd been there, like they knew what it meant to lose your cool. That night, I couldn't sleep. Denzel continued. I realized I had become exactly what I never wanted to be. Someone who used power to hurt others. The next morning, before we started filming again, I stood in front of the entire crew, and I apologized. To that young man, to the team, and to myself. He let the moment breathe. It wasn't easy, he admitted. My pride hated it. It told me to protect my image. But if I couldn't admit when I was wrong, what kind of leader was I? He turned toward Judge Thornton again. These moments don't erase the times I've failed, but they remind me who I'm trying to be. The judge's expression shifted, just slightly. Her jaw relaxed, but her eyes remained focused. These are still just stories, Mr. Washington, she said. How do these young people know that you truly live by these values day in, day out? Denzel paused, looked at the faces in the room, faces hardened by pain, eyes looking for something real. You don't, he said simply, and that's the truth. You can't know. All you can do is watch what a person chooses to do when they think no one is watching. Every day I try to choose humility, but I fail. I get it wrong. I get it right. Then I fall. Again, the point isn't perfection, it's direction. Am I moving toward being a better man or away from it? There was a pause in the room, but not the kind that ends a moment. It was the kind that begins one. Then, from the back of the courtroom, a young man slowly raised his hand. Judge Thornton glanced at him and gave a small nod. "Go ahead," she said. The young man cleared his throat. "But you're Denzel Washington," he said plainly. "You've got it made. You're rich, famous, respected. Why do you even need to care about being humble?" The room held its breath. Others nodded in silent agreement. It was the question on everyone's mind. The unspoken thought. What does a man who has everything know about struggle? Denzel turned fully to face him. No defense in his tone, just truth. Because having everything, he said, means nothing if you lose yourself in the process. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was undeniable. Some of the most miserable people I've ever met are also the most famous and wealthy. They have money, power, attention. But they've lost the things that truly matter. Their peace of mind, their relationships, their sense of who they are. Another teen spoke up without raising a hand. "So you're saying money doesn't matter? That's easy for you to say. You've got millions." More nods, more agreement. Now the room wasn't just quiet, it was alive. This wasn't a speech anymore. It was a real conversation. "No," Denzel said, shaking his head. "I'm not saying money doesn't matter. I've been poor. I've been wealthy. And let me be honest, wealthy is better." The room chuckled softly. Even Judge Thornton cracked a reluctant smile. "But money is a magnifier," Denzel continued. "It doesn't change who you are. It just turns up the volume. If you're selfish when you have a little, you'll be even more selfish when you have a lot. If you're kind with nothing, you'll still be kind with everything." He let those words settle in. Then Judge Thornton leaned forward again, her tone sharper now. "Mr. Washington, these young people are dealing with more than ego. They're dealing with broken homes, with poverty, with being overlooked and pushed aside. How does your philosophy of humility help them face these real-world barriers?" It was a fair question, a necessary one, and Denzel didn't back away from it. He nodded. "I can't pretend humility solves everything," he said. "It doesn't erase systemic injustice. It doesn't fill an empty fridge. It doesn't fix a broken school system. But what it can do is help you survive it with your soul intact. Because how you respond to pain, to unfairness, to failure, defines who you become." He looked at the group of teens now, not over their heads, at them. "When I started out in this business," he said, "I couldn't get certain roles. Because of the color of my skin. Because of how I looked. That was real. It was unfair, and I was angry. But I had a choice, to let that anger eat me alive, or to let it fuel me, to rise anyway, to get better, to work harder, to break through so others could come behind me." His voice dropped lower now, steadier. "When life is unfair, you can get bitter, or you can get stronger. And believe me, I still have to make that choice every single day." For a few long seconds, the courtroom was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of challenge. It was the silence of reflection, of something slowly shifting in the air. Denzel stood still. He could have ended his words there. But he chose not to. He glanced toward the teens. "I hesitate to share this," he said softly, "because doing good for attention misses the whole point. But for your sake, for your future, I'll tell you this. For the past 15 years, I've quietly funded a program for underprivileged youth, not just for college tuition, but real support, mentorship, internships, career guidance. Over 200 young people have gone through it. Many are now doctors, lawyers, teachers, business owners." He stopped there. not asking for applause, just stating it plainly. And then, something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, an elderly gentleman slowly stood up. Bailiffs moved instinctively, but Judge Thornton raised her hand. "Let him speak," she said. The man adjusted his glasses. His voice was soft but carried weight. "Your Honor," he said, "my name is Robert Johnson. I've been the janitor at Carver High School for 30 years. Denzel's eyes widened. Recognition flickered across his face. Mr. Johnson nodded. "You may not remember me, Mr. Washington, but about 8 years ago you came to speak at our school. After everyone left, you saw me sweeping the auditorium. You didn't just walk by. You came over. You shook my hand. You asked about my family. I told you about my grandson, Marcus. Bright boy. But he'd gotten mixed up with a gang. You asked for my contact info. A week later, someone from your foundation called. Long story short, they helped Marcus, caught him up on school, got him into a program. He's now in his 3rd year of medical school." The courtroom was frozen. No one blinked. Even Denzel looked stunned. He had no idea how the story ended. Mr. Johnson's voice cracked. "Mr. Washington never told anyone." "Never. Asked for praise. This is probably the first time he's hearing how it all turned out." A murmur swept through the room. Then another voice spoke, this time a middle-aged woman in professional clothes. She stood. "I work for Veterans Affairs," she said. "And what many don't know is that Mr. Washington has been visiting VA hospitals for years. No press, no cameras. He sits with veterans, listens to them, holds their hands. He's helped fund treatment programs for those battling PTSD." Judge Thornton's posture shifted, not just professionally but personally. Then, a young man in his 20s stood next. "I was one of those scholarship kids. But Mr. Washington didn't mention this part. He meets with us personally twice a year. He remembers our names, asks about our families. This isn't a show. He cares." Denzel shifted in place, visibly uncomfortable with the spotlight, and somehow that made it all more real. Another woman stood, older, dressed simply. "I was a waitress," she said, "at a small diner in Brooklyn. 5 years ago, Mr. Washington came in alone, no entourage, like he ordered coffee and eggs, chatted with people like he wasn't famous. When he left, he paid not just his bill, but for everyone's. And he left me a note." She reached into her purse, hands trembling. I still carry it. It said, "Thank you for your kindness and your smile. You remind me of my mother." Her voice broke. "I was about to lose my home to medical bills. That tip, it saved me." By now, the courtroom had changed. This wasn't a lecture anymore. It was a witness stand. But this time, for integrity. The energy in the courtroom had shifted. No one was checking their phones. No one whispered. Everyone was watching, eyes locked on Denzel, on the people standing up, on the truth unfolding like a wave. One voice had sparked another, and another, and another. What began as a confrontation was becoming something else entirely. Judge Thornton remained seated, but her posture had softened. The stern lines in her face were still there, but now they held something deeper. Respect, understanding, even awe. Denzel didn't speak. He stood, in still humility, letting others speak for him. And that silence said more than words ever could. Then, a final voice rose. A woman in her late 60s, her voice steady, but tinged with emotion. "I worked at that diner for 40 years, she said. 40 years. Same booth, same counter, same early shifts. She looked at Denzel. "You probably don't remember me either, but I remember you. You didn't come in as a star. You came in as a man. You looked me in the eye when you ordered. You smiled. And when you left a $100 tip. That may not mean much to someone rich, but to me, it meant one more month I could stay in my apartment. Because of hospital bills, I was days away from eviction." She held up the small note, faded from time, folded neatly like a sacred memory. "I carry this every day, to remind me That kindness still exists. The room was utterly still. No applause, just reverence. A quiet kind of reverence born not from fame, but from something deeper. Consistency, character, care. Judge Thornton slowly stood, an extremely rare act during these sessions. Her voice was lower now, measured, but heavy with significance. "Mr. Washington," she said, "when I challenged you earlier, I expected one of two things. Either defensiveness after a well-rehearsed speech, but what I've witnessed here today is neither. It's something far more valuable, a pattern, a consistency of character, revealed. Not by your words, but by the lives you've touched." Denzel opened his mouth to speak, but the judge held up her hand. "The court recognizes that true integrity is not built under the spotlight, but in the shadows. When no one is watching," she looked around the room, "these testimonies were not rehearsed. They were not expected. They were earned. Over years, in quiet places." She turned back to him. "Mr. Washington, I formally withdraw my challenge, and instead, I offer something else. Gratitude. On behalf of this court and these young people." There were no words, only silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the weight of truth. Full of the kind of presence that changes people. Without needing to force it, Denzel stepped forward slightly, his voice quiet. "I didn't know those stories would be shared. I'm deeply humbled, but I also want to be honest. For every story like that, there are days I fall short. There are moments I still get it wrong." He looked at the teens now, straight into their eyes. "I'm not here as someone perfect. I'm here as someone still learning, still growing, still striving, trying to be a better man than I was yesterday." Denzel looked across the room. Faces of young men and women stared back at him. Some skeptical, some hopeful, all of them watching, waiting. He took a breath, stepped forward, and spoke not like an actor, not like a guest, but like a man who had something to pass on. "I want to speak directly to you now," he said. "Young people, this moment we're in, it's not about me. It's about you. Everything you just heard, the good, the bad, the struggle. It means nothing if you don't understand one simple truth. Your life is your story, and you are the only one who can write it." He paused. "Let that settle. You have choices to make," he said, "not just once, but every day. 1,000 little choices. Will you be honest when no one's watching? Will you show up for someone when it's inconvenient? Will you keep going when everything tells you to quit?" He looked down for a moment, then back up. "When I was your age," he said, "I was lost. Truly lost. My father was a preacher, disciplined, focused, full of faith, and I was rebellious, stubborn. I thought I knew better. But years later, I realized he wasn't trying to restrict me. He was trying to anchor me. Honesty, hard work, service to others. They weren't chains. They were a foundation." The room was completely still. He took another step closer to the front row. "There was a day I'll never forget. I was 20, sitting in my mother's beauty shop, reading a book, and I came across a quote. 'The two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why.'" He looked directly into the eyes of the teens. That's what changed me. I started asking different questions. Not, "What can I get?" but "Why am I here?" He reached into his wallet, pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. "I've carried this with me for decades," he said. "It's a list my mother gave me when I was just starting out. Simple truths. May I share them with you?" Heads nodded silently. "1," he said, unfolding the paper, "put God first in everything you do. 2, fail big. Don't be afraid to fall. Take risks that matter. 3, discipline and consistency are the key. Do what you say you'll do, even when it's hard. And 4, remember where you came from. Then, turn around and help someone else rise." He held the paper up for a moment, then folded it with care, slid it back into his wallet. "These aren't magic words," he said, "but living by them. That's the hardest and most rewarding work you'll ever do." He looked across the room again, at the young people whose expressions had shifted, from guarded to curious, from skeptical to open. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "You just have to be real, and brave enough to try again, every day, to write the kind of story you'll be proud of." When Denzel Washington finished speaking, the courtroom sat in complete silence. Not the kind that comes from boredom, but the kind that comes from awe, from being so deeply moved that no one dares to be the first to speak. Judge Thornton rose from behind the bench, something she rarely did. In 20 years, she had never left her seat during a community session, but this wasn't just another session. She stepped forward slowly, eyes still focused on Denzel, her voice firm but softened by something new. "Gratitude. Mr. Washington," she began, "when I challenged you today, I expected polish, maybe some charm, a rehearsed moment. But what we've all witnessed was something else entirely. Not polish, but depth. Not charm, but conviction. Not performance, but truth." She looked out at the youth, at these young men and women who came in skeptical, some hardened, some hopeless. But now, they've seen something real, not just a speech, but a life that backs up the words. The teens stared at her, silent, present, different. Judge Thornton turned to Denzel once more. "In this courtroom, we deal with evidence, facts, patterns, and today, we've seen a pattern that cannot be denied, a pattern of consistent character, tested not in public, but in private, when no one was watching." She extended her hand, a rare, deliberate gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Washington, not for a speech, but for showing us what it looks like to succeed in something bigger than career, to succeed in character." Denzel reached out, shook her hand. The moment was electric. The courtroom rose, not because someone asked them to, but because they had to. Spontaneous applause filled the chamber, the kind that doesn't erupt. It builds, from the floor up, from the soul out. Every teen stood, not all clapped. Some wiped their eyes, some just nodded, but every single one stood. Judge Thornton stepped back. Denzel turned to face the young people. He raised one hand gently. The room quieted again. His voice, lower now, almost a whisper, but steady. "I want to leave you with one more thought," he said. "At the end of your life, it won't matter how many awards you won, or how much money you made, or how many people knew your name. What will matter is this. Did you make someone else's life better? Did you lift as you climbed? Did you use what you had to serve someone who didn't?" He paused, eyes scanning each face in the room. "Your story is just beginning. Some chapters may be dark, some may feel like dead ends, but you hold the pen. Don't wait for someone to save you. Write the next page, make it one worth telling." Then he smiled, a quiet, humble smile. "And remember," he said, "it's not about being like me. It's about becoming the best you. And if one day someone says you inspired them, then you'll know you've lived a life that matters." And with those final words, Judge Maya Thornton's courtroom was left not just speechless, but transformed. They didn't clap because he was famous. They stood because they were changed. In that courtroom, fame faded, truth stood tall, and in the hearts of young people once lost, a new direction began. Denzel Washington didn't just speak to them, he saw them, and in doing so, he reminded every single one of us that greatness isn't about spotlight, it's about service. It's not about having all the answers, it's about asking better questions, and maybe, just maybe, it's about failing, owning it, and rising anyway. So, if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it. Send it to someone who needs a reminder that their story isn't over, and neither is yours. Because the pen is still in your hand. Write something beautiful.